Today's guest is Bryan Pacholski. Bryan is the Senior Managing Director for Compass North Texas. He's a longtime veteran of the real estate industry, happens to be a military veteran too, with an awesome story. And you're going to love his take on living in North Texas. Welcome to the show. So we were talking about the military earlier before the show, and I kind of want to dig some more into that because that is an environment where it's like, no, you have very strongly defined limits. Your left and right was very clear.
Right.
And that's a big part of your story. So you grew up in Ohio, and then did you go straight in the military from there, or what was your path?
I did. I grew up in Ohio, in Toledo, Ohio, which is northwest corner, about 70,000 people.
So I grew up size as Plano.
Yeah, I grew up in a single family home. My dad raised me. My mom left when I was really little, about 3 years old. And then my dad, when I was in high school, he again, single dad, he got sick with cancer, and he ultimately died of cancer when I was 17 and he was 42. It was just before I graduated from high school. And I was kind of lost because, he died in March. And so from March to May, whenever you graduate, it was a very difficult time because we were I had two brothers that were living with me or with us. That was part of the family. And so we were lost, and I spent about 6 months trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I stumbled by a recruiter office downtown Toledo and walked in the Marines and realized that wasn't for me. And then went right next door to the Army and struck up a conversation with a guy there. His name was Sergeant Moody, and Sergeant Moody talked me into it and helped me along the way to get to the next step in the military. In many ways, I know a lot of people say the military saved my life. In many ways, it did for me. I don't know what I would have done had I not found that avenue to begin a life journey of really trying to become a better version of myself every day.
Yeah. Well, it's funny how one decision can change everything too. I think about that a lot. Like, this happened, or I made this one decision, and because of that, all these other things happened that were never predictable, but change a person's life.
Certainly, in a way to the opposite end, positively or negatively, there are many things along the way that I've made decisions where the consequences could have been extraordinarily different, and my whole life could have gone a different path. And so, fortunately, by the grace of God, the military gave me a nice runway to sort of start figuring out life as a young guy.
So you went into the military police. How did you pick that over other career choices in the military?
Well, as you know, when you go to MEPS, which is the military entrance processing center, you go down there and they show you all these videos and they get you psyched up about what it is that you can do. And they're like, hey, look at this. And you're like, I want to do that. Here you are, some kid from barely out of high school, and they're opening up the world to this adventure. And I think back at that point, the military slogan was "Be all you can be" or something.
Yeah, that was a great slogan,
which was fantastic. So you just sit there, and my scores were good enough, and I was able to not only get in the military but also pick a job that seemed to fit what I was wanting to do, and the rest was history from there.
Yeah, so you were active duty for quite some time.
Over the course of my time, so 22 years total from start to finish. Over the course of my original enlistment was 3.5 years. I spent that in Germany. And then I got out, and then I joined, I always say the reserves, but it was Ohio Army National Guard is what I ultimately joined. A buddy of mine was in the Ohio Army National Guard. When I came off active duty, I came home. I was still it's back home where there really wasn't any stability. And so I reached back into the military where there was at least structure and stability that I could grab onto. And the Ohio Army National Guard was my connecting point to put that uniform back on. And then I started my career after that and spent the next, whatever it was, almost 17 years in the Ohio Army National Guard.
Okay. So you were part-time National Guard, and what did you do? So you were living in Ohio, most likely. And what were you doing when you weren't soldiering?
I was putting myself through college.
Okay.
I was working multiple jobs just like, any normal college student would do. You bartend and you At that point, I was younger and stronger, so I had a bar that I was bouncer at.
Oh, wow.
And then I bartended a couple of places. I was a physical fitness trainer for a while. And then I just started putting myself in positions through school to get better jobs. And so I ultimately became a physical therapist assistant and did that for 5 years.
Okay.
Along the way in the military with the Ohio National Guard, there were floods and tornadoes, which is usually what the state force sort of is employed to support. So I got a ton of experience in first response as it relates to that. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately I got my undergrad in education, went back to school from PTA, got my undergrad in education, taught for a year, was not for me. And then that's a tough job, a whole different thing. And really you realize, wait a second, I'm smart at a lot of things, but these kids are smarter than me at math.
Are you smarter than a fifth grader?
Yeah, there's no chance. And certainly not eighth graders teaching algebra. And so I did that. And then right around that time, it was 9/11. And so I spent most of my 20s, pretty closely intertwined with the military, and then trying to go through school and working. And then when I turned 30, it was 9/11. And so from 9/11 forward, the world changed. The call to action for us as the Ohio Army National Guard, and specifically the unit I was in, we were activated almost very quickly. Mm-hmm. And then I spent the next 2-3 years deployed in support in different ways in support of and sort of that time, if you will.
Yeah, I recall that time very well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the world was different.
The world was
the world also changed in a day, in a sense, right? Like
it did. It seemed like it for me. It's just like you see today in real estate, these young kids come into the business. I'm going to bridge a little, but sure. These young kids come into the business and they're 24, 25. They're college graduates. They grew up in these neighborhoods, and, they've watched people like yourself who've been doing this for a long time. Your peers, colleagues have been doing this, and they know that they want to be. And me, I wasn't that organized when I was 24, 25 years old. I wasn't that convicted on what it is that I wanted to do. I look back and I look at some of these younger folks that are entering into our profession, and it's fascinating to me because this is such a great opportunity for people who have the desire to do this. Whereas when I was 24, 25, I was still pretty lost and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So 9/11 was a quick turn of events for our world, of course, but for me personally, it flipped a switch. I mean, I immediately was called up almost within hours to go do, because I was a military police officer. Yeah. So they brought us to the state, they call it the JOC, but the Joint Operations Center, where the state of Ohio is. So that's managing all of the affairs of the state's forces. And so we went there and set up security around that. And then we did that for maybe a month or two, and then my unit got called up, and we got called to Fort Bragg. So we spent a year at Fort Bragg because all those active duty forces went forward. Mm-hmm.
So you were kind of doing the on-base mission.
So we backfilled the police mission at Fort Bragg, which was great. It was a wonderful experience. It was. There's a lot at Fort Bragg. It's a massive.
Yeah, I was stationed there for a little while.
Such a fantastic place to be.
It was a good place to be a soldier.
Absolutely. And you feel all of that intensity at that time. So we shut down Fort Bragg, which is an open post, and then came home for maybe 3-4 weeks. And at that point, I had gotten a job selling pharmaceuticals in between some of these deployments. And I was doing a ride along with a guy in Jackson, Michigan, that I was going to sell pharmaceuticals with a company called Takeda. And I get a phone call, and it was my unit saying, "We're leaving. I need you to come in tomorrow." So I left that lunch with him, and then we were mobilized to go to Iraq.
I guess his job's on hold for now.
Yeah,
please save my spot.
Yeah, please save me a spot, which they did graciously and all of that. But it was to your point earlier, everything just sort of moved really, really, really quickly. And it was all as a result of what happened on 9/11. And it helped bring into clarity some of the things that I wanted for my life. But it certainly was almost instantaneously where things just switched.
Yeah. So at some point you made it to, I know before living here in North Texas, you lived in Mexico.
I did.
So somehow there was a transition from military being deployed all the time to living your best life, theoretically, in Mexico.
Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. Yeah. Absolutely. No, it was an interesting transition. So in between my deployment to Bragg and then after my deployment in Iraq, I would go down. My sister lived in Cabo San Lucas. She lived in San Jose del Cabo specifically. She worked at the Palmy Resort for a long time.
Wow.
And then, or at the hotel. And then she was working for a guy named Chris Snell. Chris Snell owned a company, a little boutique real estate company in Cabo, and 17 or 18 agents. And he was from Texas, and he was fascinated with all things guns, all things military. He was fascinated with me and my experiences. And he's like, Bryan, come down here. I'll teach you everything I know. I'll teach you everything you need to know about this business. Just come down. So I came down a couple times, and then as we redeployed back and started to settle back into life in Toledo, and I went back to the pharmaceutical job and realized that was not a calling that I felt passionately about. After about 4 or 5 months, I actually took him up on that deal. I made the decision to move to Cabo, and I got in the car with my dog, and we drove from Toledo, Ohio, across the country, all the way down the Baja.
Wow.
And made a couple of stops along the way. I think it was the first time I saw the country in that way. And
it's different to see the country when you're driving.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
You just see a very different country. But landed in Cabo, and a few weeks later, I was already starting to do things that I never ever even envisioned for myself. I got thrown into a development, and it was a luxury development in Cabo del Sol.
So development, you mean like developing condos or hotels?
Yeah, it was a resort community that this particular company represented, and it was Cabo del Sol, and I had an office, and 3 weeks later I was sitting in the office and showing people lots and houses that I had no idea what I was doing. and the adage was just fake it till you make it. So I was pretty good at figuring that piece out. And
I bet the military helped with that too, because there's a lot of improvising. You know the mission. You're like, how are we going to totally get to here?
For certain. And that's what I did. And I just jumped in hook, line, and sinker into selling lots and selling houses. I don't think I sold anything for 6 or 7 months. To be perfectly honest, the first lot I sold, I remember, was a little golf course lot, and it's a sad story, but it's really kind of explains how my career sort of started anyway. I was selling a lot which was up on a golf course, and it was rectangular, but I read the plot map wrong, and I was selling a lot that was looking this way, and actually the lot was straight. And so it wasn't until we had earnest money on and we were meeting the builder that we realized, holy smokes, this lot's not looking up the fairway down to the pin. It's actually looking straight out a small section of the golf course.
Yeah.
So
not a
very good first sale. Was able
sold
to
the wrong house, basically.
I basically sold the wrong thing completely and had no idea what I was doing along the way. But I learned very quickly then to become a student of the business and a student of what I was trying to sell. And then I perfected my personal real estate business on being someone who really knew all the information. People coming to Mexico, there's already this leeriness, this concern. At that point, it was still, can I own it? Is it a fideicomiso? What's the trust? Can they take it away from me? Can I lose it? And so I really did make a concerted personal effort to really understand the whole process, not just what I'm selling, so that when I would meet clients, I would inspire confidence almost quickly, because you're getting them coming in on vacation. You're getting them in some form of their passionate love affair with Cabo, and you're trying to convert them into a home buyer. And so it really helped me to gain my footing in the business.
And to get to know people too, because it's a different sell. Because I'm guessing it's not their first home.
No.
With few exceptions, this is their second or third home.
Right.
And so their mindset is going to be different than we need to find something now because our lease is up.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
Their mind, it's very emotional.
Yeah.
It's
because it's part of their dream.
Right. It's I come down here and I want a piece of this paradise. And here I am. I'm a guy that, I number one, I'm young. And so you're already battling that with folks that are from Dallas or from Houston. Mm-hmm. You get a lot of Northern Californians, New Yorkers that are coming down, and that's who we'd sell a lot to. A lot of, their homes too. And they would look at me, and I'm already struggling because I wasn't white hair at that point. And so you'd have to inspire confidence with the buyer. And I had tattoos, or I have them. And so, I used to wear shorts to work, and I realized
in Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah. And I realized very quickly those things were working against me. And so I got really smart about making certain that I had to look the part so that the client would connect with me and not see a leg tattoo that I got when I was 17, 18 years old as a barrier to them connecting with me.
Right.
And so it was, you're connecting with folks that are down there having a good time, but they're still smart and they know what they're trying to do. And they want a piece of that romantic view of having a house on the beach. And that's what I sold for 7 years before
you helped sell dreams.
In many ways, yes. So
yeah, I mean, it is an asset that has value.
Yeah, for sure. But
people are making the decision around probably a dream or a vision they had.
Where I really struggled when I sold houses down there is I didn't live. I've always been sort of this workaholic person, and so a lot of people, they embrace the whole social aspects of it, and I was never very good at that. I didn't play golf. I lived on a golf course. Didn't play golf. There's the ocean. I spent more days looking at the ocean than getting in the ocean. I spent a lot of my time working and being available to work, because it's real estate. You got to create opportunity and you have to be available for opportunity. And so I really maximized a lot of that. So some of my peers and folks that I knew that were selling houses, they loved the dune buggy and they loved to go out and get into scuba and go out fishing, and they were able to blend those aspects of their passions into their business. I struggled there. That was just not something that came naturally for me. Maybe it was the way I was brought up. I don't know. I just always through my life took things a little more serious and focused on the work. And so at about 7-year point, I had an opportunity to open a little boutique brokerage.
Wow.
And it had 9 agents, and it was a unique opportunity for me to represent some really great developments, work much closer with the developer, who was unbelievable. Like one of the most talented people I've ever met in my life. Just from laying out a piece of property to the actual design and architecture.
Yeah, developers are, one, they have to be smart, and two, I mean, they're kind of visionaries. They're making something out of nothing. It's incredible. And the really good ones are creating a whole community just out of a vision that they have.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the cooler parts of the real estate industry. They're at the top of the food chain too. Like one of my buddies that I went to grad school with was like, like in the operating business world, like private equity is kind of at the top of the food chain, right? And then you got Wall Street, and you kind of get all the way down there to the company and the worker. And in real estate, it's like the developers at the top of that food chain, because they're like putting it all together and they're making things real.
For certain.
And getting the money, of course. That's
making
important.
the money, making the decisions, making those paychecks.
So that was probably interesting to meet those developers and be part of those communities.
You just become part of the process. So I switched from that side of the business, from the selling side, and to more of a broker support role. I helped my agents close their deals and help them source their leads and just really help them cultivate their businesses, which I found such for me, a bigger reward at helping them be successful. And of course the money was good because you're making an override on their stuff, but I wasn't competing against them. And I found a great deal of satisfaction for me personally there in that side of the business. But then I also became a student to the building process and really understanding how these houses are built and what goes from plot plan to architectural drawings to, watching footers be dug in the dirt and watching things come up with steel and concrete. It's really fascinating, and you just become a different student of the industry, and it was a very fascinating step into this side of the business, being more of the broker.
Management and leadership. And at some point, though, you made it to North Texas. How did that happen?
So Hurricane Odile kind of wiped through Cabo back in 2014, in September of 2014. Massive hurricane. And it really hit. We went through several hurricanes over the course of my time there, but nothing like this. This was a direct hit to Cabo, and it shut down the infrastructure. It shut down the airports. It shut down the schools for, was projected to be months and months in terms of a recovery period. So we as a family decided to pull up our roots. We looked at Park Cities, Utah, and realized I was just not ready to go from one extreme to the other.
I do love skiing, but that'd be hard to go from the beach to the mountains.
Second home to second home market made sense, but beyond that, it didn't make any sense for us as a family. So my then wife was here, and she grew up in Highland Park.
You came to different Park Cities.
Yeah, she came from the Park Cities, and so I met her parents because I sold them a home in Cabo, and so it was kind of a natural, let's go home where there's family and let's try that. So we ended up here and putting our kids in the school, and we didn't really have a permanent plan at that point, but quickly it evolved into this, we're going to leave Cabo completely and unroot ourselves, and brought ourselves here to Dallas, Fort Worth, and specifically in the Park Cities. And, I went to work for Briggs Freeman Sotheby's, and Robbie hired me. I think he was part of that international business that brand has. He was captivated by that experience that I had. And so I think there was a niche piece for him. But quickly the role changed. I started just kind of helping him do some things. And then there was a change in their main office, in their Lover's Lane office. And I went there and became the manager of their primary office and oversaw that business. And then ultimately ended up becoming the chief sales officer for that company.
Okay, wow.
And ran all of Briggs Freeman, where we had, 7 or 10 offices, I'm not sure, across the DFW Metroplex, and did that for 3 years before I ended up leaving that company.
And you came over here to Compass.
And came over to Compass, right.
Now, did Robert recruit you, or how was the process of getting to Compass?
It was...
You were like one of the first people, I think.
I was the very first.
Kind of planting the flag here.
It was Jonathan Rose and Christy Berry. They had that little boutique company called The Collective Real Estate. And it was and early on, and they separated from Sotheby's and went on and did their thing and opened a little boutique shop as partners. And they had reached out early on to Robert Refkin and said, hey, we have a little boutique thing here and really interested. And at that point, Robert Refkin wasn't ready to come to Dallas. 8-10 months later, he reached back out and they connected. And it was Jonathan and Christy who, basically Robert had asked, who do we need to manage this? Who's the person to manage this thing if we come to Dallas? And Jonathan and Christy called me in and they made me sign an NDA and told me what they were doing, and they pitched my name over to Robert. And on Christmas Eve, very interesting phone call, Christmas Eve of 2000, maybe that was 17. It would have been 2017. Robert Refkin called me and we had a 45-minute conversation, and it was a philosophical conversation about what he was going to do and what he had already started doing in other markets. He has just opened up Chicago, and it was very similar. I bought into his philosophy very quickly. Agent-centric company who was focused on helping agents really be better at their jobs and have tools and processes and staff and human resources rather, to help them be successful. And we really connected, and it was just this whole concept of agent-centric, because I fundamentally believe that the agent is the entrepreneur, but also the business runner. And so from there, it was pretty quickly thereafter that we started Compass on January 2nd, 2018. And here we are.
So here we are 5 years later, almost 6 years later.
Almost 6 years later.
Yeah, and so you're I don't know your specific title, but you're effectively the managing director for North Texas.
That's
Is that
correct.
the title?
That is senior managing director.
Senior manager, exactly. Okay.
Absolutely.
And how many offices do we have now? Like 7 or 8?
We have 7 offices, just under 1,000 agents here at Compass. Our retention rate is extraordinarily high, over 98%. The recruiting efforts that we have across the country, or across the North Texas, as you said, is we continue to bring agents in, and we continue to deliver value to those agents, which has been fantastic. And it's as a person who's become a student of the industry, but also a leader within the industry, I'm really proud of what we've created. Compass is something that has been poured into a ton of effort and a ton of arguing and a ton of sweat and tears and battles and things like that. We've bumped our heads just about on everything we could, and we've made it hard on ourselves. But we've learned a lot as an organization.
Part of the process.
Created, and I'm super proud to see who we are in the market and what we do within our communities. Who we are in the Park Cities is exactly who we are in Flower Mound and in Argyle, and who we are in Plano is exactly who we are in Southlake and Fort Worth. And so we have an organization who really has built roots into our communities, and that is what this business is all about, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is totally community based, helping people find their place in the world. I love that mission statement.
Right.
And every family is a little different, but that's super cool. In between episodes, stay up to date on all things home and lifestyle with my weekly newsletter, Into the Weekend with Matt, where I share the latest real estate updates, new videos from our team, and advice for both buyers and sellers alike. To sign up, go to hastingsre.com/ITW. That's HAISTINGSRE.com/ITW. So you've been around, leading agents is probably a little bit like herding cats. I know it's definitely different than the military because everybody's a volunteer.
It very much is.
There's no threats that will work.
Right.
What have you learned about leadership in this role? Or
it's very interesting. You certainly have to evolve. And then you also have to check your pride at the door too, along the way. So the military is very directive, and I am a very directive leader within the military. But I've always had I've always been well known for really caring for my people and taking care of my people. Stern, tough, directive, but very much cares. A soldier's leader, if you will.
Yeah.
Transitioning into civilian and then into civilian leadership, business leadership has been a journey. It's a lot of self-audit and a lot of willingness to really evolve, if you will, because to your point, you can't run around here and tell independent contractor entrepreneurs, type A personalities, do this. It's not that business. It's more of a management and a provisioning, if you will, of various different resources so that agents can be, successful, but also, not hold them too accountable, because many of you don't want to be held accountable in that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting personality type that comes into the business.
For certain. And so it's what I've learned in this industry as it relates to just leading agents is, one, every one of you have your own definition of success.
Yeah, it's very personal.
And it no matter what we do as a brokerage in terms of trying to lay out a strategy to attain success, each one of you define it differently. So there is no certainty on how this is going to work for one and not the other. If so, then everybody would look at the top agents in the market and say, I'm just going to do exactly what they do, and I'm going to have the same amount of success. And I can tell you, it doesn't work like that. And so it's very personal. And I also have found leading agents that, and as much as you can have all this success or monetary or otherwise, there is this confidence piece to realtors that isn't always 100% on, meaning agents struggle in this. Like if their business dips one way or the other, and so
their confidence can dip with it.
Absolutely. And so a big part of leadership in this business is tapping into that and being very much aware of that piece of it, so that you can bolster and anchor confidence to just continue to get out and get after it. This is a business that it is very much what you sow and what is what you reap. And nothing is handed. I remember getting into the business when I first went to Cabo. I was like, well, there's 17 people here. If every one of these people just threw me a deal, I'd be off and running. Yeah. Not one of them.
Nobody owes you a deal. Yeah.
No one ever said, hey, here's something for you. And so, it's making sure you have a very personal connection with the folks that you lead, and they feel that you care and their success is important to you. And I'm very proud of the leadership team that we have on the ground here because that's how we collectively approach this business. And I think it makes a difference as it relates to leading entrepreneurs that are independent contractors, all with different goals and objectives.
Yeah. So you know a lot about agents. What advice would you give to somebody who's trying to choose an agent?
As a team leader?
No. Well, that would be one. I would love to hear what your thoughts on teams, but more like a consumer. Maybe somebody's moving to Texas and they're needing to find an agent to help them.
It's such a great question, especially now, given the fact that there's been such an attack on the role of the agent in the real estate transaction. And I say attack, maybe it's not quite that extreme, but there's such polarity in terms of you need an agent and you don't need an agent. And I think the consumer has been bombarded with various different messages around the value that agent plays in the real estate transaction. In addition to that, I think unfortunately, there are a lot of bad agents in the business who have delivered bad service, and consumers have decided that from that experience, they'll just do it themselves. Yeah. They start their search online. They have all the information. It's pretty easy. Just need somebody to fill out a contract. So we don't need an agent. And there's a lot of that mindset out there. The unfortunate thing to that is you really do need an agent,
especially in this marketplace. But
for certain, it's so confusing as to what's happening in the market. So you need somebody who's very well versed in the information, so that it can be articulated appropriately and then evaluated by the consumers, so that they're making good decisions. We've not done ourselves, in my opinion, as an industry, realtors specifically, generalizing all of us, we've not have done a very good job of really discerning our value. We get in these places where we're so focused on just cutting the fee that we're not really talking about value. We're not really talking, what am I doing? And so I think the consumer just thinks, oh, we're paying someone to show me a house and open the door. Yeah. And unfortunately, agents that I work alongside, there's a whole value proposition. We spend a whole lot of time talking about value propositioning that agents bring to the table, that needs to be out and upfront, so that the client not only knows what to expect, but knows what to hold accountable. I'm working with our marketing team right now. There's this thing that's in Marketing Center, this document that says 120 things I do for my client. Well, we took that.
It's a lot of things that we probably do, but for a consumer, it can be too many to think about.
Exactly. So the marketing team, to your point, took it and they scrubbed it and they cleaned it up, and we're going to create an ad campaign around it, because I fundamentally believe that the agents that work with us are very focused on the people service aspect of the business. Those that aren't, that are more transactional or more just, different in terms of just pursuing leads and cold calling, that kind of thing, they don't really thrive at this organization. But those that have a business strategy, that are focused on making certain we're delivering service to our clients, and that service has a value to it, that connection has to be made. In this day of AI, you see all this AI stuff that's being integrated, which is fascinating. Oh yeah, unbelievable. Yeah. And it won't be long until somebody figures out how to make AI like, here's your houses. AI.
Yeah, on a low level, it's already happening with dynamic search, where they get fed the houses that they're most likely to be interested in.
Absolutely. But the difference is going to be the people interaction, the relationships that we have with our customers and our clients, to make sure that they understand where AI is limited. Yeah. You can't, an agent can't, or an AI is not going to get under the house and make sure the foundation is in good shape. They're not going to make sure that you're not overpaying for a piece of property, or you're not walking into a deal and you haven't valued it right for yourself. You haven't contemplated mortgage interest rates. You haven't done all the things that an agent really can do. And so for an agent to really be prepared for the consumer, they have to have their full value proposition and all the things that they do systematically aligned, so that wherever their client is, they can meet the client there. Right. And then they can deliver value. And many agents, they work reactively. Oh, my client needs to look at houses this weekend. So they're just reacting and kind of going through motions. The agents that really thrive and really succeed have systems that they duplicate every single day. They're doing the same things for all of their clients. It's almost as if it's a recipe, and they're following it the same way. And where you can evolve, you evolve over time, but nonetheless, where you can innovate, you innovate. But that's the key.
I've told some of our agents on our team in the past, like one of the best things as an agent that we can do is have that client think we're the only client we're working with. I may have 5 buyers I'm working with at a time, but for that client to feel like, hey, they're getting all of my attention and advice at a very high level. I mean, I think that's where the good agents do make it look easy. And some people are like, oh, I could do that.
Right.
And you could, it's possible, but it requires a high level of systems and duplication and process to be able to do it that way.
There's no question. Question. They're, when an agent comes and talks to me, or when I talk to agents, there's 2 things that I can, as a broker, any broker can really do, or 2 things that we can't do rather. I can't inspire you every single day to get out and do this job. And it can be bone crushing sometimes. Living commission check to commission check is so hard emotionally. It's living in and out of your savings account. It's watching your resources deplete and then be filled back up. It's very, very difficult to know if I'm going to get another listing or another buyer and just live in that space. So I can't create that for you. You have to have this entrepreneurial spirit to go out and just get it.
And that faith too, like it's going to work out.
Absolutely. And then the other piece is your book of business. This is a people business. So if you're looking to show up here and be successful in this business, and yet you don't like people, or you just want to buy leads from some lead source, or you are hoping relocation finds you, it's going to be a really difficult career for you to thrive in and really optimize your earning potential, because that isn't how this business is. It's relational. And so for you to be successful in your relationships, you have to have some, and then you have to become valuable to them in this way. And so if you have those, you can learn the industry, and you can be successful and really reach as high as you want.
Yeah, it is amazing, all the possibility in the industry. And to your point earlier, one of the reasons I came to Compass is I think that the industry is getting split a little bit into maybe the door opener, the agent who doesn't see their whole value that they could bring, or doesn't even want to provide all that value, and they just want to open the door and maybe fill out some paperwork, and then to the service. And I was like, hey, it's like Nordstrom versus Walmart. Like, I could go buy a pair of shoes at Nordstrom and get full service and advice and all that else, or I could just go buy something at Walmart. And there will be people who want that, and there'll be a place for both, I think. But man, you can make a bad decision. A consumer can make a bad decision and not realize it.
You go so fast, you're making emotional decisions.
Yeah.
You're turning what should be a practical decision into an emotional decision. You have misleading information from all ends in terms of what is the right thing to do and not. Having a relationship with a realtor and again, as a student of the industry, which is what I've tried to make it my super strength in terms of this business, you have to have someone that you can lean into and actually trust that they're going to lead you through this process, absolutely focused on what your goals and objectives are as a consumer. And having the right realtor, in my opinion, helps guide that. In absence of that, you don't know. If you don't, you may get somebody who's only there just to make sure the transaction gets closed, and they get their paycheck. It's almost as if I've forgotten that there's a consumer. It's just a unit check. Let me get the check. Yeah, no pun intended.
That's unfortunate that exists, but it exists in every industry.
It absolutely does exist.
It's a bigger decision though for people,
without question,
and it affects their life a lot more.
It's the biggest decision most consumers ever make in terms of having to buy or sell, and it comes with its own level of stress, excitement and stress and all of that. And so you add like the making sure that the dots are, what's the seller disclosure saying, and is it complete, and does it have everything? Are we aware of everything? Are we inspecting everything? Or is there, the financing terms or any of those details that a realtor can bring focus and attention on, so that the consumer can focus on the joy of, or the emotion of, the transaction.
Yeah, starting their next chapter. Absolutely. I mean, that's pretty cool. That's one of the things I like most, is helping people start their next chapter,
which is fantastic.
Whatever that looks like.
Right.
And being an advisor versus a salesperson is kind of what I'm hearing. And we were talking about people starting their next chapter. Like what, let's talk about living in North Texas.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of our audience is moving to Texas. Or a lot of people are still thinking about moving to Texas. You've been here, it sounds like a decade now.
Pretty close. About. Yep.
What advice would you give to somebody who wants to move here to Texas?
That's a great question.
Maybe they're in Ohio or they're in New York in the winter, and they're just thinking, I think I want to move to Texas.
It's, and there's all of this, we're in the center of where everybody's coming, and Dallas-Fort Worth is the epicenter of it. And while you've seen our neighboring city, Austin, sort of slow in terms of their market, and a lot of the folks relocating into Austin, we've not seen a slowdown here.
Yeah.
Companies want their employees back to the office, and so they're, the relocation companies are busy. And it's important though, as you well know, there's a different feeling in all these different neighborhoods. There's a different connection from a community perspective that you're going to experience whether you're living in Plano or you're going to live out in something more rural out in Argyle, or if you're going to go up to Prosper because the land value is slightly less. It's a different experience. It's a different way of life. And so I think Fort Worth is the future, and it's going to continue to grow. And because
it's funny. I think you're the third guest in 2 months that's talked about Fort Worth being like underrated or underappreciated.
And I think it really is.
Yeah.
Especially from an affordability matrix. It's expensive, but there's shopping. There's now restaurants. There's a life. There's a social life.
There's all the things you could find in Dallas and Fort Worth, just not as much yet.
Not as much. So, but being aware from someone who's relocating in and taking the time to really understand the differences between Fort Worth and Dallas, which are, in many ways extreme, but taking the understanding the difference between Lakewood and Lake Highlands, or University Park and Highland Park, there are differences in these microcosms, these communities. Richardson versus North Plano. I mean, there's getting to know these areas and making certain that from a personal perspective, how you want to live and how the schools that you want your kids to go to, the experiences that you want your kids to have within these schools, making certain that you're well versed on what you want, and then where that is. And I think having a realtor that is very well versed and well networked to be able to make sure that their client is getting that experience is really important. I've seen a lot of folks come to North Texas and they show up, and then a year later they bought the wrong home in the wrong neighborhood, and it doesn't quite fit their lifestyle, and so they're selling and trying to find something different. And if you're trying to mitigate some of that, it's on the front end where you're actually really getting to know. Now, you don't quite know until you actually move into a community how you're going to integrate with the community and where you're going to shop and go to school and all these things, but at least doing as much research and as much experiencing as you possibly can.
I'm seeing, and I think the whole industry is seeing a lot less virtual shopping, and people are more inclined to just come here and do in-person shopping trips, which makes a big difference because you can spend a day in a community and get the feel and the vibe of it and know whether it's for you or not.
Right.
But I think you brought up a point that I think is so important for anybody moving here or just transacting in general is lifestyle, because their choice of home and neighborhood will affect their lifestyle.
For sure.
I tend to think, I talk about this all the time, people overweight the actual house itself.
I would think so.
Because, particularly up north here where there's a lot of new construction, it's easy to get seduced by this amazing brand new house and forget that, this neighborhood's not going to work for us.
Yeah.
I want to go to Lifetime Fitness, but it's 35 minutes away from here. How likely am I going to be doing hour-round trips to go to the gym? That's something to think about. And people tend to overlook it, maybe even more so when they're relocating. Here is what's the lifestyle I want to create? And because it's easy, the homes are so affordable here relative to other big metro areas. It's wow, look at this amazing house I could buy. Yes, but it's far away from the lifestyle you want to create. You can still buy a nice house, maybe closer to the life you're wanting to build in Texas.
It's interesting you bring it up. I was talking to a client the other day, just happenstance, somebody that's using one of our agents. And
it was by accident that you were talking to them?
It was happenstance. Yeah, there was no complaint on this one, but I do get plenty of those. But the client was the client was basically, they moved here. They instead of buying a home, they moved into the Park Cities, And they didn't realize how, number one, the market changed so significantly in the last basically 25, 26, 27 months, where property values have changed so dramatically.
Yeah.
So they've sort of priced themselves out. They want that they thought they wanted that lifestyle, but then that lifestyle there's a cost to it.
Yeah.
And then you want to be able to provide for your kids and make sure your kids feel connected to it. And so making certain that you're very deliberate on your choices in terms of where you're trying to go I think it's so extraordinarily important.
Yeah, it's so true. You talk about raising kids, and you're raising your family here. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that or advice on that for somebody?
Well, I'm a single dad, so it's a lot of work. I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old. It's really trying to figure out what my kids are into. We spend a lot of time here in Plano because my daughter does North Texas Performing Arts Academy, which is at Willow Bend Mall.
Yeah.
And so I've spent a lot of time at NTPA in Willow Bend and in Frisco and in Dallas, where we've a lot of time going up and down the tollway to get her to up and into out the theater. So it's making sure that you also know that you're in a neighborhood, but you have the ability to go outside the neighborhood and find the things, and it's just a 20-minute drive or whatever it is. But it allows your children to connect a little bit further. My goal, because my kids go to school in the Park Cities, was to get experiences outside that as well. It's been very important for me to be able to give them a little more versatility in terms of how they experience this, not just confined to school-based activities.
For lack of a better word, the Park Cities is very privileged, and so getting exposure outside of that is good for being well-rounded.
It is, and it gives them an opportunity for them to be successful in other things, not just, again, typically it's school-based or Y-based. So my kids have played sports outside of the neighborhood. They've done theater outside the neighborhood, and it's been very important. So as a dad raising children, it's being aware of what's out there, because there's so much for our kids to be able to do, whether it's equestrian and horseback riding or theater or
everything under the sun.
There's so much to do, and you may just have to travel a bit beyond to get to it. But the reward on the other side of it is you're connecting with other types of kids that have more in common with yours, and that they may not have in where they go to school. And that has been very, very fruitful for my kids.
That's great. Now, I think your kids did summer camp this year, or your daughter or something?
My two went to Kanakuk.
Okay, which that was not something growing up this summer. I mean, of course, I was in a small town, but this is a big part of the culture.
Huge.
Here in North Texas is going to these sleepover camps.
Would that be the right
word for that? Yeah. So is this the first year, or this has been happening for a while?
No, it's been, I'm not certain who's more rewarded when the kid goes to camp. Is the parents are rewarded if it's like, I'm sending my kids off to camp 2 weeks free or a month free, if that's what you do, or if it's the kids who are going off to camp and getting away for the parent. I'm not sure who's winning there. Yeah. But sleepaway camp is pretty big here. You have all types of camps all over the country, all over the state that our kids are going to. Mine go to Kanakuk, which is in Branson, Missouri. We've had a good experience. It's kind of a familial decision. Their mom went to that camp.
Okay.
And their mom's brother went to that camp. And so we just kind of kept it in the spirit of that. And it's worked for us. My oldest daughter's been there 8 times. My son has been there 6. This is 6 times for my son and daughter, my youngest daughter. And they love it. They just went for a couple of weeks, which is a perfect amount of time. They've also gone for a month, and it's too long in my mind. But it's a great experience for them to get out of this heat in Dallas and transfer it to something else. When we were kids, my dad, they would just kick us out the house and we'd just go outside and play. And there's the hose and see you when the lights come on. And we laugh about it, but it was really true. I mean, that's how I was raised, is you left the house in the morning and you didn't come home until the end of the day. And what you did between morning and night is sort of just don't get in trouble and don't get arrested kind of thing.
I don't know if this is a city thing, the sleepover camps, or whether it's just a Texas thing, because I haven't lived in a big city outside of Dallas area. But I find it to be a fascinating part of the culture for families. This is a big thing here.
It's a big thing. I went to Boy Scout camp. I was in
Me
Boy Scouts
too.
my whole life.
But it was like a week.
It was
right?
1 week, and it
yeah.
was one time a year, and then otherwise you go on the weekends, and it wasn't like pack up your whole life and send you off with a big trunk full of goodness.
Right.
And you certainly didn't get any mail or care packages.
No, because it was a week, 4 days.
No, literally, it was there and back, and that's it. And so it's a big part of the culture here. Sport camps or Christian-based camps, or just the outdoorsy.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of kids that I know, just being associated with my kids. They have created lifetime friends with their their kids they go to
I've
camp
seen it with
with.
my nephew. Like that's a big thing.
Just
Like
a
because
big
he's there for 4 or 5 weeks in the summer, and then he meets these friends who he's really connected with.
And they come home, and like my kids came home this year, and my youngest, they have their text group, and they're on Facebook FaceTime, and they're all still talking to each other.
Only old people like us use Facebook.
Yeah, it's exactly. Facebook's not an outlet for them, for sure. So no, there's no value to that.
Yeah. So what do you like to do in your off time?
That's a great question. I don't have a lot that I do. I'm so busy with work and then with kids that I've immersed myself in their worlds. So, if they're, every day during the week, they're busy. Last night I didn't finish carpooling until, I don't know, 8 o'clock.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Because
so
you're going to volleyball, you're going,
time.
Really is. I'm really committed to being as present in my kids' lives without helicoptering too much. And doing what they're doing. I want them to have the opportunities. I like them to explore those things for themselves, so that they, my goal is to get them ready for, I have one daughter who will be out to college in a couple of years, and then my job is just different. And so, the other two won't follow too far behind her. And so most of my time is that I do like to travel a bit, and I get to Cabo every so often. I was finishing a big project that we were doing, took 5 years to do down there. A Dallas family was building a big 30,000 square foot house that I project managed.
Big is an understatement.
It's a big and beautiful home.
30,000 square foot is a
massive,
huge
thing.
house.
It is, and it's incredible. So I was doing that, and I like to find outlets where it's work related, if nothing else. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm with my kids. So
So an ideal weekend then, is it sports or?
Yeah, an ideal weekend.
Yeah,
is when there's nothing going on,
Okay.
and literally I can do nothing. I love being at home. I love being at my home. I love tinkering around my house. I'll garden or whatever it is I'm doing. I love being home. I love to just be home, and when the kids are there, and if their friends all come over and eat me out of house and home, that's perfectly fine. I love that. That's a perfect weekend. The weekends where you have to up and go, I still get to Ohio. Often my brothers are there, and so I try to get there. And like I said, I've been down to Cabo quite a bit because of doing that project. So when a weekend home, when there's no sports and there's no real activities of any consequence, that's a really perfect weekend for me.
So the ideal weekend is downtime.
Downtime. I do enjoy it. Absolutely.
Yeah. I feel like, or I think that this year the real estate industry has afforded me more downtime than any time in the last 3 years. Because a couple of years ago, or even a year ago, it was like you had to show 50 houses and write 20 offers to buy one. And now it's like maybe also 10 and write one offer and have one negotiation and buy the house, and the client gets what they want. And suddenly it's like, oh, I have more bandwidth. I can either choose to run around to help more clients or even help slightly more clients, but have a life. And it's been kind of refreshing this year.
I think agents through the COVID period, if you will, or whatever we're calling that post-pandemic, agents basically shut down in, what was that, August or May of 2020, February of 2020 is when we sort of shut down. And by June of 2020, you guys were back
off to the races.
And it was a race. And it was incredible to watch the pace in which you were all working. And then for us as a brokerage to figure out, okay, how do we do this? Because where are they, and how do we meet them where they are to make sure that they're getting what they need, which is a question that we asked ourselves every day, and we still ask ourselves in many ways. But watching that off to the race, it's interesting to see how many of you have redefined your work practices, reclaimed your time, put up some boundaries even. Before the pandemic, if you will, the offices were, bustle and activity. And I think a lot of agents would punish themselves. Maybe that's a strong word, but punish themselves for not going in the office. Like I should go in the office for 2 or 3 hours a day. Even if you're going through the office and you're just talking to your peers, it's not really, I think a lot of agents have realized that's not as valuable to me today as it was then. I've changed. My business has changed. I'm communicating with the people I need to communicate differently, through text or through whatever networking groups that you were all in. And so it's very interesting to see post pandemic, if you will, how the agent has really redeveloped and innovated their personal business. It's going to also be very interesting because now we're going to a different transition of the market where there'll be much more for sale. Things will sit on the market longer. That's all coming. And so it'll be interesting to see how agents respond to that as well.
I wasn't planning on talking about the market, but maybe just real quick, what's your 2 cents? Like what is, it's the end of 2023. What does 2024 look like?
I think it's going to look a lot like what the fall is going to present. There's a lot of inventory coming on the market. I think that's great for buyers who are pent up. There's this polarity, for lack of a better word, between those who have really favorable interest rates and those who are now at 6s and 7s, hoping they can get to a 3 or 4. And so there's this stalemate between potential buyers who would love to do something, but they're not willing to take on a much higher interest rate. And so it'll be interesting.
It's tricky, yeah. Their friends who duked it out 2 years ago got the low rate.
Right.
And had to pay a lot for the house and compete and all that.
So it's going to be interesting to see how this market between buyers and sellers and people who want to buy something different and sell, really how long it takes for them to get okay with potentially having a higher interest rate. I think the market will yield longer times on market with more inventory. That's just going to happen. But that's all pre-2019. That's exactly
it's
where
like
the market
we're back
was.
to where we were before.
Exactly. And I think it will be back to where if I had to forecast, I would expect that we're going to have a pretty good fall. The market's going to move in the fall. There's a lot of people waiting to buy. And I think there's some real interest in seeing what comes on the market. Always sort of just after school gets back in session till before, late October, there's a slight bump. And then just before Christmas, there's always this interesting bump in the real estate market. And then
it's so funny how there's a huge number of closings in December.
It's
You'd never think.
It's the craziest thing. It's often, and then it's back to spring market or spring market preparation. And, depending, that all is contingent on the weather. And so I think we're back to a more seasonal sales cycle. We are definitely headed towards more of a buyer's market where buyers are far more engaged and far more aggressive. We're feeling that in our transactional space right now, where there's buyers that are, walking away, leaving money on the table, earnest money on the table, not feeling comfortable to move forward. We're seeing a lot of that activity, and I think that's going to continue into the spring market.
There's just so much uncertainty in the world, and so it carries over into real estate transactions.
Without question.
We saw somebody last year give up $40,000 of earnest money with a builder for a house he could afford with a relatively low interest rate, at least compared to what it is now, and they just couldn't feel good about it. And all the data was saying, like, no, this is a good decision.
Right.
And and then the builder turned around and sold it like a week later.
Yeah, right? and then made an extra $40,000 on that other earnest deposit.
It was a very profitable transaction for them. And, at the end of the day, people have their own choices, but the uncertainty can be hard for people to overcome sometimes.
For certain.
Yeah. Well, the future, I think, is bright for North Texas and for real estate in general.
We couldn't be in a better place. As I look at the market and I look at Dallas-Fort Worth specifically, as I said earlier, we're in the epicenter of relocation and growth. It's the only thing we're limited by, and is just the amount of land we have available in terms to grow. I think that's why Fort Worth in that area is going to be the future in terms of our significant growth over the next decade.
It's affordable growth.
It's absolutely, but it's there's such a positivity with the folks that live here. And it's not just one specific area. I mean, no matter where you go, their communities are thriving, and schools are thriving, and kids are thriving, and we're not without our own challenges, of course, that any big city has.
For sure.
But as it relates to, you know, raising a family and having the opportunity to have prosperous growth in your job and lots of industries that have come into,
it's very diverse too. We're not relying on any one industry here.
No. And so we're very, very fortunate, and Dallas is just going to continue to grow and be the central point in the country where business and commerce is
cool to think about.
It absolutely is.
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Bryan.
And you.
And thank you so much for being on the show.
I appreciate it.
I hope that the rest of the year is awesome for you.
Let's do it.
Awesome.
Have you been thinking about moving to North Texas? Maybe you're looking in Plano, Dallas, Frisco, or the surrounding communities. Each year, our team helps dozens of families make the move to Texas. We'd love to help you begin your journey. Learn more on our website at hastingsre.com. That's HAISTINGSRE.com.